to the 8th edition of the Collections Technology Think Tank series. My name's Colin White and I'm the founder of Credit Connect Media. Thank you all for joining us this morning. In this edition of the Think Tank, which we've labelled 5.1, we're going to bring together some of the collections professionals to talk about the latest collection strategies and, as ever, assess the relationship between people and technology with the ever-changing cost of living challenge. We're going to hear from a number of high-profile professionals and see if we can gain any learning on collection strategies and takeaways that we can take away from today's event. Obviously, the cost of living pressure is continuing at the moment. Lots of people now are probably feeling the effects of interest rates. Obviously, energy bills have gone down slightly from last year, still obviously challenging, and the debt around that, we hear frequent figures around that. And now we've got insurances which are starting to rise as well. So there's a lot of daily challenges that consumers are facing, and probably as a result of knock-on of the kind of business impact and the cost of doing business as well is really starting to play into how everything is panning out in terms of collections. So today we'll talk about some of those things revolving around a couple of the content kind of themes that we put together for you. So just to give you an idea, we've got this session coming up in a minute. We'll cover customer engagement and the collections challenges. We'll have a break around about 10:30, 10:35. And then for those of you who want to join us for the next one, we're going to have some other panelists talking about affordability and vulnerable customers. So a lot to cover off there. But obviously, we want to thank today's sponsors who are helping us with support of today's event by providing speakers, and that's WEbio and Money Hub. So we thank them for their support on that. But yeah, I just wanted to really, we'd like to hear from people at our event. So we'd like to hear from you. So if you see on your screen in front of you, you've got a panel, like a panel of buttons. So what you can do is click on I for information about today's event, which is already there. Underneath that, you've got the speaker profile, so have a look at those. Then you've got another box which provides you information on our event store. So please have a look at that and click on that and find out more about those. And then the final box we've got is an information box which talks around. It's got various web links that you can have a look at after this event. So it's a link to WEbio, link to Credit Connect's website, and then some background to our new awards that we launched called the Credit and Collections Industry Awards. So we'd like to, I think there's something for everybody in the industry to have a look at from an interim perspective, and hopefully there's some interest in that. So please have a look at that. But the most important box of all is the speech bubble. And from that, we want to hear your views and also any questions you've got for our panel. So please click on that at any point, type in your question, and we will put it to our panel. If we haven't got any time, we write a review in about a week's time on the Credit Connect website. We'll review that. On top of that, we'll have some event polls. So those polls will appear across the screen. You don't have to answer them. They are anonymous to take part in. But the great thing about them is we get some feedback in terms of what you think about this subject as well, and also give us some feedback on what you think of this discussion as well. That'd be really helpful. And also, another way of interacting is getting involved with our hashtag. Our social media handle is collections tech TT. So feel free to share your views online as well. We'd really like to hear from you. But enough from me. I always go on a bit too much at the beginning. What I will do is hand over now to Chris Warburton, who's the founder of RO Strategy. He's going to introduce our panelists and provide some background to this discussion. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Colin. So yes, welcome everyone to the think tank. As Colin said, my name's Chris Warburton, director of RO Strategy, and I've been sort of in the risk operations kind of space for the last sort of 20 odd years, everything from lending through to credit and collections. You know, what we're doing now is we're obviously involved in quite a few videos, sort of exploring like the latest in terms of credit and collections. So really, it's really this part of that series. And you know, so we've got a couple of sessions, great sessions today. The first one here is, as Colin explained, we're really going to talk a bit about you know, customer engagement and collections, and then after that we're going to talk a little bit about vulnerable customers and vulnerability. And so this first session is really focused on the customer engagement and collections, as I say, And I suppose really what we're going to delve into for this hour is really around that kind of topic. And I suppose, you know, contact, I suppose, and engagement is really a core element of collections. And I suppose if we look over the last sort of, you know, few years, really, we've had this maze of sort of complexities in terms of like changing customer behavior, regulatory pressures have sort of come up, you know, there's digital transformation that's happened. It's been a hugely sort of changing kind of space. And I suppose for this session here, we want to just take a step back and say, well, look, where do we sit with that today? Where do we sit with digitalization? Where do we sit with AI? Where do we sit with different kind of like contact channels? Where do we sit with agent digital interaction? And then what technology are we using? And then where do we kind of go from here? So I suppose that's the objective of this morning's discussion. And with me, we've got like 4 great speakers, and maybe you guys just wave when I go through. We've got Neil Costello, who's the UK marketing director for Lowell. We got Jodie Trodd, who's the head of portfolio analytics and execution at Intrum. Give us a wave, Jodie. And then we've got Ajay Mittha, who's the head of customer operations at Interbridge Mortgages. And then lastly, we've got Mark Oppermann, who's the chief revenue and marketing officer at WEbio. So thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. And I suppose to start the conversation, Ajay, I was going to go to you first, and just ask you, you know, what are some of the trends maybe that you've seen in terms of shaping the landscape of things like customer engagement and collections and engaging customers? What are some of the recent trends?
Thanks, Chris. Thank you for having me on the panel today. We're in a slightly different position within our business, that we're just a startup business, but obviously we're very sort of aware of what's going on in the environment today, and obviously from previous experience from working from sort of a bank. A lot of it, I guess, is, as Colin mentioned, the issues that you'd be seeing in collections is the cost of living, higher interest rates, etc. But people actually probably worrying and then trying to preempt contact on the collection side with the link to fixed interest rates obviously ending on their mortgages. That obviously is going to have a big impact on people in terms of actually worrying about how they're actually going to make those payments and what impact that's going to have with interest rates fluctuating with mortgage providers. Obviously, some of them reducing rates, and then we've seen in the last couple of weeks them increasing them again based on the swap rates. And obviously pressure on the Bank of England to try and actually reduce those rates. People are obviously very worried about that. I think for me, in terms of communication channels, it's about actually having the ability to communicate over various channels. So not just relying on the telephone, which I think is quite archaic, and a lot of people like myself don't like to actually pick up the phone unless we need to. I pick up the phone when there's an actual problem that I can't resolve myself via self-service options. I think some of the key things on the communication side is actually linking up those customer journeys as well. So if someone calls in or then sends an email a few days later or responds to a text message or WhatsApp or whatever medium you have, what's frustrating for customers, I feel, is actually having to sort of repeat what the actual issue is or go back through what the history of that collections or difficulty in terms of vulnerability, etc. is there. So actually having a system in place that actually can collate all that information together in one for someone to actually be able to see what point is that customer at, rather than having to dig up the history of the account and actually spending that time. And some of these situations for customers can be really difficult. So them having to repeat, etc., is actually quite a stressful thing. So I think that's probably one of the key things.
Yeah, and Jodie, I mean, I know you guys have put quite a lot of investment into like technology and those kind of things. I mean, are you seeing that change, even if you just look at the last 6 months, in terms of the way customers are necessarily contacting you or want to be contacted, or changes of dynamics really? I mean, is that kind of changing, particularly as you look back to things like cost of living, energy price increases in particular?
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing the same thing. We are trying to invest in a lot of different channels. So as you said, Ajay, we're looking at the sort of two-way SMS channels. We've got that implemented. We've got a portal, telephone lines. But I think it's what we're trying to do as well is use sort of like analytics behind the data to see which customers will want to use which channels, right? So we can tailor the approach to those customers. So we've got a lot of digital investment. We know that some people do just want to speak on the phone. Like if it's a really stressful thing, they need a voice. It's not just what we found as well from our analytics it's not just what you'd classify as like the older generation that wants to speak on the phone. Sometimes it's vulnerable customers. Then we need to make sure that we've got the portals, self-serve options, and tie all of that together. So we are seeing a lot more come through digital means. Like our digital strategies have grown massively over the last year. So our account strategies are focused more towards digital, but using the analytics behind it to guide the customers in the right way, depending on their circumstances.
And Neil, what's your kind of take? It's almost like, if we look back almost like a year ago, we were very much sort of like digital or not kind of things. And it feels like the more we look at it, the more complex it becomes, and like it becomes a bit much more sort of like grey kind of areas in terms of like nuance, I suppose is probably a better way of saying it. I mean, what's your kind of view on that? I mean, in terms of like, where do you guys see?
Yeah, good question, and thanks for the invite and great observations, Jodie. We're in a similar place. So we set up our digital function a few years ago, and I vividly remember the meeting I had with our group CEO, Colin, where I was convincing him for the need for an app, and he was like, why would somebody have an app on their phone that's a debt collector? And we're now 3 years down the line, and our app has as many engagements as our website. So it's that kind of belief that I had back in the day, where you go, well, there's going to be two almost cohorts of customers who are going to go, do you know what? Fair enough. I owe this debt. I'm just going to go to your website. I'm going to pay it off. But we've got we've segmented a group of customers and got a really good understanding of them, of how they use the app, where they are using it on a repeated basis for a long time when they've got plans set up for a period of time. And I think what we've found, which I'm delighted with, because it was kind of a gut feel at the time, we've given away free credit scoring, benefits calculators, that kind of stuff, and we hoped that would encourage customers to complete their payment plans and not break over time, and it's proved to be the case. So I think digital engagement, this part of the sector, and my background's banking and insurance and pensions and blah blah blah, this part of the sector is late to the game on digital, but I think we've probably all starting to prove now that customers are more than willing to engage in digital and actually would prefer not to make that phone call unless they're vulnerable.
And Mark, I mean, you guys have been doing this for a while, and probably seen that journey from completely digital to much more sort of like nuanced. I mean, what's your where do you kind of what do you see now, I suppose, amongst your clients? I mean, think in terms of the complexity, and talk a bit about the complexity that you're seeing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Yeah, over the say 24 months, this whole digital and self-service, it's an overnight success. It only took 5 or 6 years to get there, but really, I think actually I'm going to take a slightly different angle, if you don't mind. I think some people have jumped too quickly to link digital with self-service and completely forget about actually, Jodie, you mentioned it, some people still want to talk on the phone. That actually, it should be a blend of all the different channels, and digital should be one. What I see, and again, look, we do self-service and we do conversational AI. We'll get into that in a moment. But on a more general point, a lot of what I've seen in the marketplace, people have jumped too quickly away from the intimacy of a phone call to the efficiency of self-service, and they've seen that as that's their digital, and they don't need to do any more. But if on one side, if you have a phone call which gives a lot of comfort to a lot of people, and then you have something that can be called a whole self-service journey, there's a huge gap in the middle that's not being serviced. Where self-service is good when it works, but not everybody goes through a self-service journey. You need to help people. You need to give people. So there needs to be that fallout and that sort of that safety net to be able to catch them. Now, we see that on an ongoing basis with our clients, where you've designed, and it's all about design. That designing better journeys is really important. And I think, Neil, the point that pick up from yourself is, and I say it to people on an ongoing basis, if you can give them a good experience, as you clearly are doing on the app, don't be surprised when they come back over and over and again use it on an ongoing basis. So I think sometimes people are too quick to rush to one thing, and actually, and digital has been that, and digital equals self-service in many people's minds, but it's only one aspect. And it's something that I think that we need to look at it from a broader point of view to be able to say, actually, what are all the bits in the middle? And that would be an area where I know where we operate on an ongoing basis, and we see a lot of benefit from getting the blend right between digital, bringing the agent in where needed, and then handing back over to digital, and sometimes doing it in a full self-service. There isn't enough of that there in the marketplace today. It's either one or the other. So there isn't that blending capability enough yet, is what I would see from what's in the marketplace.
Yeah, it certainly feels like even over the last year, we sort of evolved from being all or nothing to being so much more sort of like this sort of like blended sort of like nuanced capability. And that feels like that was almost like the step that was taken, like we understood the complexity of it and the complexity of the journeys, and sort of moving away from that.
But I think sometimes, Chris, the value of the efficiency that's the gain on digital, it's undoubted. Look, when you look at what it costs on a phone call to service a conversation versus digital, it is going to be cheaper. But some people have jumped to that too quickly without actually understanding the benefits to the customer as well, what the customer needs.
That was going to be my next question, I suppose. How do you balance that, right? So if you go to, you go even to other markets, you sort of hear, it's very much around efficiency, and we want to get efficiency from it. But actually, it's this blend around like customer experience. You want to have some of that stuff in there. You want to have the ability to be able to go into sort of like agent type conversations as well, and sort of like this sort of blended. How do you balance, I suppose, customer experience versus efficiency as well? I mean, because there's a bit of a balance there, isn't there? Because you want to be able to do both. I mean, what are people's thoughts around that, Ajay?
So, Chris, for me, I think it is. I think the organisation needs to think about what is the driver for digital. So, if the driver, as Mark says, is to actually just lower costs, etc., you're not going to get the customer sort of the customer front being the priority. And I think that's where people probably get it wrong. I think they need to focus on the customer. So a digital piece is actually just a complement to that. And also, the other thing is, a lot of people may use digital to force everyone down the digital route with no exit out to actually speaking to a customer. I think that's one of the key things we've discussed as an organisation, is actually at every point there should be an exit out to actually physically speak to a person that could actually help them in terms of difficulty and everything else. And I think that's pretty key too.
I think just on the back of that, Ajay, is exactly what we're seeing. So a lot of it is you've got the customer angle, the efficiency angle, but then there's also a big bit in the middle, which is the design of that strategy, right? So we use a lot of digital outbound strategy. So you'd start off on a digital journey if the sort of analytics showed that that's the way to go. You could start off there, but at every touch point you have with that customer, whether it be sort of inbound, they've got the option, and you make it transparent that they can speak to someone, and that's the blend, I think. So you can use the efficiency for like bulk processing on the outbound journey, but you just need to make sure through the design of your strategy and the options that you've got available for customers to come back to you, you're making that sort of space for them, and it's really clear for them that they can do that. So transparency is a massive thing, and we have to be completely open with customers to say, this is your call to action. Like, you can speak to us, you can email us, you can go through the portal. Either way, we'll sort of support what you want to do and conversations. But I think it is that design of, let's not just chuck everything for a digital strategy and expect everyone to pay. Like, it's literally going to be, where are the offshoots? So I completely agree, Ajay. Like, we're seeing the same thing. It's a big complex design to get a sweet spot between it.
Can I just chip in there as well, Chris? Because the bit for us that we've been looking at, so digital startups, particularly in Europe, who thought they could penetrate this sector, purely digital, have failed and mothballed. And the fundamental reason for that is because you still need to have telephone contact with those people that you need to speak to in a vulnerable situation. What the challenges we've had in our business from an exco perspective when we've been discussing this over the years is actually be prepared for your average handling time to go significantly up as a result of shifting people to digital. And that's a good thing, because those people who just want to interact with you and go, fair cop, I'm going to pay it off, done and dusted digitally. But then that means that your agents are handling those customers, again, back in vulnerable situations, who it's very, very important that we speak to them. Your average handling time will go up. Your cost, your cost in the engagement centres might go up, but that's a byproduct of the shift to digital. But it's one that you have to accept, and commercially it works out.
Yeah,
I mean,
agreed.
I was going to go back to one of the things you mentioned at the start, Neil, was really around sort of like building things into the app. So, for example, essentially extra value add into the app to keep people coming back. So just a reflection on that, it's kind of an interesting idea, because you're trying to make the app sticky. Is something we always talk about in collections. Like, how do you get engagement, and how do you make people coming back to sort of do we do enough of that even with agents as well? I mean, is that a new way of thinking? Really, it's a good principle that we should think about. How do we make sure that we're adding value on every single interaction? How do we make sure that we're actually offering value on every? So it becomes less a sort of like a process and more of a good customer experience to a certain extent. I mean, what are kind of the views on that? As much as digital, but with agents as well, and really I suppose across the customer interaction. Is it something we've done enough of? Is digital sort of teaching us to do that maybe elsewhere in our processes? I mean, Jodie or Ajay, digital. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was about to say, Chris, on a digital point of view, that what we're seeing is that, and this is sort of more addressing a number of issues around the agent. If you're helping the agent do their job, like if you look at, for example, somewhere between 30 and 50% of an agent's work will be answering really basic stuff. What's my balance? When's the next payment due? Can I do this or can I do this? 3 or 4 questions frequently asked, and that's where digital can really help. A good design gives people those answers and takes away. So coming back to your point, Neil, the MD agent actually is dealing with a bit more complex, where they can actually get involved. But really then the question would be, are you helping the agent do their job? And that will be something where we're seeing. So I'm sure people are familiar with Teams and Copilot and stuff like that. That's something that we're trialing at the moment, where an automated response. So it's not generating a response going back out to the customer. It's generating the most likely response to give it to the agent for them to approve, maybe edit, and then send back out to the clients. So that's where the likes of AI is helping in a big way. It's adding value to the customer, but also adding value to the agent in their role, that they're not having to do the heavy lifting, that actually the technology used correctly will be able to help and assist the agent do their job where there is a lot of complexity. So that's something that we're seeing being used a lot now. And the feedback from our customers is that what they've done, they have ring-fenced, and they're talking about digital-only agents versus phone agents. And what they've seen is that they've seen jobs they've posted. It's twice the amount of people are coming and applying for a digital agent versus the more traditional agent. Because look, you talk with any contact center person in any operations, retaining, getting people, attracting, even, if I only want 10 agents to work and the start date is the end of March, I'm probably going to have to get 15 or 20 to start the training process for the month to get them to that point where I've got 10 at the end of it. So that is where we're seeing a lot of value being added to the business, and the actual job of an agent is changing. It's never going to go away. And whoever tells you, oh, this will be done by ChatGPT and generative AI and what have you, they're talking utter BS. I won't be rude, but fill in the blanks. But So if the agents will always be there, but what we need to be thinking is, how can we make the agent's job better so they can service the customer easier, quicker, and faster?
Yeah, I think it's about feedback loops as well. So exactly to your point there, the agent's job is completely changing. So where it was like a collections agent we would have before, we're turning more into sort of a customer service person. So someone to basically, what the customer wants to hear if they're calling an agent now, if they can't self-serve, is they want that empathetic view of like, I've got something that I need to talk to you about, and having that person on the phone that can go, right, I understand that you're having an issue, even if it's with some of the digital pieces. So like if they've tried to do something via the portal and then they've tried to get to these places where the digital isn't exactly working, they'll come inbound, and then that's what we need the agents for. And we need to present through a feedback loop that information to the agents to arm them to say, right, okay, well, if you're having a problem with this, we've seen a lot of that. If you just look at this section, it's got your reference number, or do you know what I mean? Like sort of a feedback loop to the agents for the offshoots, because you're always going to get offshoots from the digital strategies. So for me, it's like two sort of different pieces. So from the digital side, it's got to literally just be transparent, and the call to action has to be so clear as to what you want the customer to do, because all of the wording that we have to use and stuff like that in the letters sometimes gets confusing for people that aren't easily confused. You know, like there's a massive letter, you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? The call to action needs to be in your face, see what they have to do. If they still can't do that, the offshoots into the collection center where the agents are there as a customer service view, I think works really well together. So that's what we see as well quite a lot through our strategies.
I think also, if I can jump in, Chris, as well, off the back of Mark's point, I think there's a job for us to do as a sector to sell the roles that the agents do. So as you get this shift to digital, I think the role that our agents do is so powerful, given the emotional, mental strain that is on people within this part of the sector, financially, mental health, however you want to describe it, that there should be, and we think now there is such satisfaction at the end. You know, as stressful as the role can be, the guys are walking home going, I've done an absolutely phenomenal job, and I'm not just picking up the phone and going, I'll tell you your balance, I'll do this, I'll do that. Actually, they're dealing with people in real turmoil, and we've seen like our internal people scores lifting up, because they're not dealing with those menial calls. They're dealing with people who really need to talk to. And again, I'll go back to we're quite happy that average handling time will extend as a result of that, because you're helping the customer out in the end.
But I think that also goes, doesn't that also go back to what you're saying around on the digital piece as well, which is like, how do you inject value into the whole interaction, so you're actually helping people all the way through? But then that comes back on from an agency point of view as well, rather than being much more sort of transactional. And it feels like that kind of thinking is kind of, I mean, it's always been there, but I suppose it's evolving. Ajay, you're going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it also comes down to like the performance measures of the agent, which is also going to change as a result of that. So instead of like looking at how many calls, average handling time, and just basic measures that people used in the past, it's about actually targeting the agent to actually say, okay, which performance you manage you on, how do we make the process or the digital journey better for the customer? So they're the ones that see it day to day in terms of the difficulty customers have in using your processes, etc. So by targeting them to come up with those ideas for improvement, and then when you're designing the strategy and designing how digital works, you're getting them involved in that, because you may go to your tech team and say, this is what I want, and they're just going to deliver what they think you want, not what you actually want. So it's really key for you to actually look at the performance measures, how you're performance managing your agents, and actually thinking about that in a different way, because that can actually just enhance customer satisfaction.
Yeah,
Ajay, I couldn't agree with you more. I have been at so many places where you have agents on conversational SMS, WhatsApp, their in-app message, whatever. It comes to the agent, and automation deals with most of it. But when it does come to the agent, all they're doing is they're measuring it in the same way as they'd measure an agent on the dialer, not taking into account. And you're sort of going, but lads, it doesn't work like that. And that absolutely frustrates me, because I have had instances where, and it was web chat in one particular instance where it was said to me, oh, well, we turn off the web chat when it gets really busy on the phone. And I'm sort of going, but hold on. The whole concept of you wanting to offer web chat was deflect phone calls. Oh, well, we don't get measured on the web chat, but we do get measured on the phone calls. And I'm sort of going, oh my God, the little bit of hair that I had left, I nearly pulled out. But that is the reality. That is where companies aren't looking at that and looking at in a complete sense and saying, how do we measure this correctly? And I would urge every business to look at each channel differently, because one hat does not fit all.
So, I mean, one of the questions that just come through there is just really around, what metrics or analytics should we be using, right? So we talked a bit about average handle time there. I suppose it going up, which is one aspect of it, but it doesn't look at the bigger picture. I mean, what are some of the things that people are looking at to give that more holistic approach? I mean, even though what you're saying there around having separate channels, I mean, but looking at it, I suppose, across a blended channel as well. I mean, any thoughts on good measures that we do need to go after?
I think you can look at different touch points within those communication channels. So rather than just like the metrics of how many calls and stuff that's quite rudimentary, it's like, if you have an app, and we're developing an app, in terms of, what's being used most, what sort of questions are being asked, and how do you make that your FAQs are actually sort of change and adapt to what customers want, not they have to sift through loads of information to get the information they need. It's about that sort of, like I said, the touch points, which I think are
I think what we would see from sort of the analytics view is you have to know that journey. So exactly to your point, Ajay, the touch points of the journey, so that you can see, right, from a telephony journey to a email journey to a portal journey. It's like, what would the customer be seeing? Would they fall out? It's certain places that they fall out as well. So is a screen on a portal too wordy? Is the information on there easy for them to understand? Is it clear? Do they know what they've got to do? If people are falling out a lot at that sort of screen of the portal, you can sort of say, right, we need to have a look at this. So it's sort of like the touch points and the journey points, and where people fall out, and then also where people engage more. So when you know those journey points, you can map those and then feed them onto payer rates, feed them onto sort of like settlement pieces. So there's lots of different outcomes that you can then map against your fallouts and people actually taking up offers that you're putting on there.
And I suppose linking to another question just that's come through around the complexity around implementing some of these journeys. I mean, that's part of what you need to do in terms of like, how do you think about sort of building out the infrastructure to put this blended infrastructure in place? I mean, Neil, I don't know if you've got perspective on that. Just like, what are the complexities around putting digital, and particularly blended digital, like Mark was talking about, into your customer treatment strategies, including measurement?
Yeah. Where we found, or the challenges we found over the years. So we really went after digital maybe 4 years ago, and then it started to tip 2 years ago, I think it was, where we got more customers coming through digital than we did through the engagement center, and you can imagine it's gone further the other way. But again, going back to this conversation earlier about the customer versus commercial benefit, we found in the early days that average setup value in digital was significantly lower than CC, which sounds obvious in the grand scheme of things, because we've almost made it too easy for customers to set up plans at a certain level. And so we've gone back and almost reset ourselves from a digital perspective to go, again, balance the commercial and the customer outcomes for the organization, and gone, well, if we know certain data points about a customer, if they come into our portal to set up plans, there'll be a certain level that we expect. And if that can't be met, then the engagement center kicks in. So that's where there's a really nice and delicate, delicate from a regulatory perspective, balance that you put in place, where if a customer can't afford a certain amount online, there must be a reason, so therefore we need to have a conversation with them.
Yeah.
And we've got that in place now, and we're starting to work through all sorts of different ways of personalizing data, where you've got, you know, APIs coming in from, it might be bureaus, it might be whoever in the future. And I think that's really, really important. Again, going back to Jodie's point about the metrics that you pull in when we are sitting on the Exco talking about digital and being confident enough that the channels that we set up are appropriate for the customer. And again, I'll go back to the point, I don't think there'll ever be a point, certainly in the near future, where you don't have a significant back office of agents needing to handle the right calls for customers.
But it seems like what you're saying in terms of like the steps you go through is, you know, we might put some in initial channels, but then it's like that data infrastructure seems critical, because then that gives you the feedback loop around what's working versus not. And I mean, Mark, you've already mentioned, you know, Chat GTP, I suppose, and AI, and given that. But I suppose, where is that? But is getting the data right almost like the initial step before we can start talking about some of these other things that are sort of out there? I mean, is that almost like a prerequisite before we can start talking about, you know, more advanced decisioning, more advanced sort of segmentation? I mean, Jodie, what's your kind of view, I suppose, on particularly on large language models, I suppose, and extra segmentation? We've heard Mark's view. I suppose we kind of good to hear, I suppose, what you guys are thinking about it.
So I think it's all about the feedback of it. So we've got a chat bot that we use, and we use the predictive analytics through like the AI information interface back from bureaus and stuff. But we've had to do a lot of work on that chatbot, because it depends on how people ask questions to it as well. So do you know, like, you're not always going to have really simple people saying exactly what you want them to say for that to pick up. So we've got a lot of different language barriers. We've got a lot of vulnerable customers, a lot of people that don't know how to use it. So it's all about the learning of that, because you can implement all of the stuff off of like AI and digital learning, but you need to look at the results of it to see if that's working for you. So we've got this sort of chat, but we don't do too much in the sort of chat GPT world, or we're starting to look at speech analytics and things like that. But it's quite early days on that. So yeah, it's something that we need to invest more in, I think.
Yeah, I know we were chatting just in the pre-event session, and Mark, we were chatting about, I suppose, just the hesitation around almost like, you know, don't give full reins over to it yet. Although, but there seems like there's things you can do in the background around sort of like, you know, scrubbing conversations, over things, but don't give full reins over to it. I mean, that's what you're saying, Mark.
You wouldn't be able to, Chris. It's as simple as that. And again, I'll come back to my BS statement. If somebody says that they can, it just is not going to work. And actually, it was interesting. I was only talking with one of our clients who we do a lot of work in this area with, and they're very much down the road on the whole AI and generative AI, and they were testing out on one side, could they use generative AI, and ChatGPT, I think, was one of the ones that they were using. And all that they were doing was they were modeling and simulating the conversations that they were having in the contact center, and trained up the chatbot to do it. Not immediately, but incredibly quickly, the chatbot turned to be a very aggressive dealing with the customer. And they were just flabbergasted. So the idea of, at this moment, I don't think will it be possible in the future? Yes. You know, AI has its benefits today. Jodie, you mentioned the likes of understanding intents. When people come into you, that's one of the things. Again, look, we've developed our sort of WEbio. It's a customized language model for collections, exactly on the same methodology as ChatGPT, and they're all very similar. But we've, you know, over the past 4 years, we manage millions and millions of these conversations. And the one thing that you need lots of data. And that is, so in very simple terms, all that we do is that we look at three things. Can we help on entities? So when somebody is, I need your date of birth, I need your postcode, and I need your account number, let me tell you, people give you them in weird and wonderful formats. And if you can strip out all of them, and even if somebody goes, yeah, my birthday's tomorrow and I was born in 1980, that the technology can work out, what's today's date, the 22nd? Well, actually, it's the 23rd of February and 1980, and bring it all together, check it against your record, and or somebody goes, well, I can pay you next Friday, or I can pay you tomorrow, or I can pay you on Monday, next Monday. Now, that's where the real clever stuff is starting to happen. We see that, and what we see is 60% and more people get through the ID&V process rather than having to get the agent involved. The minute you get them through that, the next bit is, well, actually, now that you can speak with them, what are they wanting? So understanding the intent, is it do they want to make a payment? Do they want to make a part payment? Are they vulnerable? Guiding that conversation, and we've heard it for years in retail, that personalization of a journey, and that's what is happening now. And we see this, we do this with our clients every day. And the last point is propensities, understanding where the conversation is going to end. So are they exhibiting vulnerability? Do they want to do this? So on average, our clients, what we're seeing at the moment is 47% of all conversations are exhibiting some traits of vulnerability. That immediately then flags it to the business or the agent, and then they can make a decision on, actually, do we bring it to a specialized team, or how do we manage it? So from the point of view of, there can be lots of benefits there today, but you have to operate within the guardrails of an industry that's quite regulated. So yeah, it is an interesting time.
Yeah, but it's also a bit of a problem around sort of, I suppose, media, and we tend to sort of run ahead of ourselves in terms of what our expectations are of a particular technology. So look at 1998, we were all sitting there expecting to be, we were going to be watching videos over the internet and all that. It actually took, we do that today, right? But it took us like 20 years to get there. The technology with AI is we're sort of saying, well, look, we're expecting it to basically be like, robots, almost like, sort of talking to someone like another human. But actually, there's use cases in much smaller cases, which is what you're kind of describing, Mark, which is like interpreting smaller parts of information, maybe doing summarization of agent notes, those kind of things.
Yeah. But look, Chris, everybody on technology, everybody overestimates at the early stages, but then they underestimate over the longer period the actual real value that it delivers. So this is no different. The hype and the curve of new technologies is what we're going through now.
But the one thing that's really come through, I think, on this conversation is, if you get your data right now and you get your understanding about how you're interacting with customers, understanding that, then that becomes powerful as an enabler to do those things later on down the road. But that's quite a bit of work, I would think. I mean, Ajay, I'm just kind of interested in your kind of view, I suppose, bring you in the conversations and like where you think we're going.
Yeah, well, I think like what we talked about, I think Mark sort of said this, was the ChatGPT isn't the solution there. It can be manipulated in certain ways. I think that's on the worldwide perspective. I think we had a pre-call to this. I said that there are powers that be out there that are trying to manipulate that so it has false information in there. So would you let it loose with your customers? No. I think you've seen examples with that. I think it was a DPD had an issue recently with a ChatGPT bot. I think it's useful as Mark uses this phrase as well, like a co-pilot, for even standard communications and standard letters and stuff like that. I think it could help with that piece, but someone needs to oversight on it. Someone needs to check that off before it's actually issued. To actually have it sort of running without those controls, I think is dangerous. It's just not going to work.
Do we kind of think of almost like the controls, like you wouldn't let an agent loose on new customers without some training and that's some oversight? I mean, are we just talking about the same controls as you'd have over a person as well, even for these automated processes? So is our perception of automation almost like incorrect? We've got to have controls and oversight even over automated kind of processes.
Yeah. You do.
Jodie or Neil.
Simple answer is yes.
Yeah, I agree. It's like with the regulations and everything, the end outcome is that this is going to be dealing with our customers. So the control piece is huge, because everything is the output it's dealing with a person. We've seen from the post office scandal, so we've seen all of that stuff that's happened. It may in our massive data sets look like 10 or 12 people, but that's massive to those 10 or 12 people. So, like making sure we don't isolate or interfere with any of that end customer point is the biggest thing, and the control piece around that is huge for us and everyone in the industry. It has to be.
Okay, fantastic. And I suppose I want to go back to an earlier piece that we were talking around, sort of like educating customers. And so certainly we'll get into this in the next discussion around vulnerability, I suppose, financial difficulties, those kind of things. But a big role has become sort of that customer care kind of aspect, and particularly in terms of education. And sort of thinking about that, both in terms of digital, but also in terms of like average handle time for calls. How do we best balance that in terms of like how much we educate customers and sort of help them versus I suppose collections to a certain extent? I mean, where do you sort of like draw the line on that in terms of how we include education, that education aspect within our collections processes? Neil, maybe.
Yeah, I'll give it a go, Chris. I think there's a few bits for me, and this is based on experience before I joined this sector as well, which is bringing financial education to life, I guess, in UK schools and youth groups and things like that is vitally important for the long term. And I personally believe we've got a little bit of a mission behind it that it's lacking. So we've partnered with my bank to try and do that. But for the here and now, I think there's, for me personally, and again, a little bit of a mission within Lowell, we set up a customer panel 3 years ago, I think it was now, and it's now got 4,000 customers on it, and it's got a bias because their customers are engaged. They're people who haven't engaged, so we've got to keep that lens on it. But we systematically test all of our communications and test all of our app launches, and whether it's releasing new functionality, whether it's credit scoring, things like that, to understand actually does this resonate with the audience that we're dealing with. And I'm sure we all know the average reading age of our custom group that we're dealing with is 7 or 8. So we all have to take a step back. We're all in privileged positions in big organizations, and just step back and understand what the customer base that we're dealing with comprehends and understands. And I think that's an important step right here, right now. But I think longer term, we absolutely need to be doing more around, supporting our customers with the right and relevant content, and maybe that'll help them engage with us and trust us. I think the industry's got a inherent mistrust from it. I've gone from insurance to banking to debt collection. Maybe it'll be estate agency next.
Don't worry, Neil.
There's a mistrust that is completely ingrained there that needs breaking, and I think it's important that education comes in.
But as you've gone through your journey, has your view of the debt collection sector changed?
I think it has, and I think a lot of from when I joined only 4 years ago into the sector, I think the sector has woken up to the importance of customer experience and the external representation of that, whether it's Trustpilot, whether it's Google reviews, whatever it might be. I think we've all started to, Cabot, Intrum, everybody, when we took over Hoist, it was really, really important that customer experience was coming to the fore, because, again, I'll go back to my banking experience, we launched Atom Bank, and trust was important. If you're trying to encourage people to put tens of thousands of pounds worth of savings into a bank that's only been alive for a year. I've tried to take that learning and transplant it into this sector, and I think it's absolutely vital. And there'll be some naysayers who've been in our sector forever and a year who've gone, well, why do you need to care about that stuff? But I think it's the role of us on the execs to make sure that experience comes to the fore.
And I suppose just in terms of that, sorry, Jodie, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that really quick because I totally agree with what you said there, Neil, especially the customer groups and the people that you're speaking to. We've also found through the consumer duty implementation that it's so different now to what it used to be like 15 years ago when I started in the industry. But like we started adding sort of links to our portal that and websites that even if people don't speak to us, like they can sort of see a glossary of terms or what certain things mean when they're getting letters and stuff from debt collection agencies, and linking them through to people like Step Change or Pay Plan or all of that kind of stuff. So even if we don't speak to those people, we're trying to make it like a rounded journey that they've got a letter from us, they've got an email from us. The first thing someone usually does nowadays is Google who that is. So they go through to our website and go through that sort of digital piece to look up the company to see if they're legit, which Trustpilot, as you mentioned, Neil, and all of those things really help with getting the scores up to show that there's sort of confidence in that company. And by stamping those sorts of things across our websites, it's helping people see, like, we're giving you the information, we're not trying to hide it from you. Like we've got on there what StatBard means. So it's a big sort of piece in the industry of like a lot of accounts are turning StatBard. Like we'll tell you what that means. So we're not hiding it from you. Like, here you go. Do you know what I mean? So it's helping with that trust thing, I think.
Yeah. And you probably find that customers who've been through it before, I mean, they know your companies and they know that there's a trustworthiness aspect to it, and so they're probably more reassured. But are you finding, particularly with cost of living and sort of like increasing arrears, maybe even a slightly different demographic, that just has to be an ongoing education process? I mean, what more can we do? Would you still find there's still that same misconception for almost like new people who haven't been serviced before? I mean, Ajay, I'm kind of interested from a creditor point of view, what you kind of think, at least, anyway.
Well, I was listening to what you guys were saying. I think, yeah, it's really important to educate the customers and give them the opportunity to learn and understand how it works. And in the mortgage sector, there are technical things that people need to understand too. It's just about simplifying those terms and how it works so that people are very clear, like Jodie was saying. I think the other thing really for me is making sure that when it does fall out and it goes to the agent is sufficiently trained. I think the agents have got, and I think Neil sort of mentioned this before, in terms of they've got a really hard job, but they need to be trained to a higher level now too, because they're going to be dealing with stuff that, you know, they'll probably, obviously, in terms of what type of people you recruit to do that agent work and the understanding they have, they need a higher level. You need to invest in that training to get them up to that level to be able to educate customers too when they do speak to them. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I suppose, Mark, from your point of view, I suppose, as that sort of, I mean, data kind of helps, I suppose, really understanding where people are sitting with each of those and looking at response rates and those kind of things. I mean, what's your kind of your view on that in terms of like using data to help sort of drive education, or using digital channels to drive education? Do you see some of that sort of being built into even things like web chats as an example?
Yeah, and I think we've touched on it earlier. Jodie, you mentioned people getting letters. Neil, you mentioned about the average reading age. And one thing for us is just keep it simple. Like, for example, you're sending a digital message. Just because you can use 150 or 300 characters, don't. What's the job to be done? Just actually jump straight to that. And it's incredible how... and look, technology is great, okay? But one thing that we all forget is the softer skills. Actually, what's the content of the message? And if I look at one content and a different content and compare the results, you can have double the results by just actually making sure it's the right words that you use in the right way. So from that point of view, that's an education where always just try to keep it simple. So rather than, and I'd say, nearly overcomplicating an answer, simplicity is key. We find that works every time. Just get to the number of the thing as quickly as you can, especially on digital. People just want an answer. Don't give me all the other bits. So that would be my sort of view on it. And once the agents are seeing that as well, that it's important that that's done as well.
So where do we go from here? We talked a lot about sort of data implementation, this sort of like blended kind of environment that's sort of been created, and it's not just one or the other. It's now like everything's integrated together, and then using data to do better segmentation. But what's next on the what do you think's next? Where do we go over if we look over the next year or so? Where do you think we'll end up? And Jodie, maybe go first in terms of what's your view on the future, specifically customer engagement.
Yeah, so our view on it is basically to try and increase the digital piece, but with the offshoot, the offshoot journeys, and looking at where we need more of those, right? So we're trying to tailor teams to deal with specifics. So we're trying to categorize vulnerable people into 3 different levels. Like some are real strong case management, but you don't just like sort of bundle vulnerable customers into one pot, because some can pay. Like some have just, do you know what I mean? So we're trying to sort of segment different pieces and offshoots and make sure they go to the right teams, the right next digital journey, or the right person. So I think instead of trying to bundle a lot more in tech-wise, we're just trying to use what we've got. So we've got a sort of a plethora of channels just to make sure we're continuously learning from the outcomes of what we've seen over the last year, to feed that back into the channel we've got and start perfecting that. So the biggest thing is just transparency, making sure with like email. So email seems to have been around for ages, but actually how many people click a link that looks weird? Do you know, with all the phishing and all of that kind of stuff going on, we need to make sure it's sort of is showing that that's a trusted link, right? So it's stuff, even just stuff like that, of how you get click-through rates and stuff. That's what we're trying to sort of push through now. It's just enhancing that what we've already got, instead of sort of going too fast with more tech.
We've done the exciting stuff, but now the sort of the real work
Yeah.
stuff.
We need to look at the results. Yeah.
Neil, what's your kind of view?
Can I just answer that, Chris? And it's a great point. I think when I came into my role, I remember the CFO saying to me, "It's going to be like shooting fish in a barrel, Neil, from a marketing perspective." But it's a very, very different marketing role that we're trying to play here. And even we have to sit down with the FCA and explain why we've got a CMO in place, for example, because the role that we're playing is we know where our customers are and who they are, and we're trying to engage with them. We're not a retailer that's trying to acquire a customer. So therefore, the challenge is when people hit your website or make that call or whatever it might be, that the conversion happens from a commercial perspective. And I still sit here, 4 years later into my role, going, the amount of people that are hitting the website, they shouldn't be hitting that unless they know who we are, because we're not doing mass marketing or anything like that. But when they get there, you have to have controls in place and the technologies, I think, behind the scenes to understand why you're missing out on conversion. So we've got a great relationship with a provider who helps us understand the behavioral activity of people on the website, and whether they're, dare I say, manipulating data points and dropping out, and where it's all falling out. And then we can start to work out, right, do we need to change our strategies? Do we need to change our website? What is it? So whilst the tip to digital, I think, in this sector is coming, and it will catch up with the rest of financial services soon, I still think there's loads and loads of opportunity in that territory.
Ajay, what's your view?
I think for me, it's looking at some of the preemptive stuff before they actually enter arrears. So there's been a lot of talk about open banking and the way that works, and there's difficulty with classification of that. But I think that's a mixing understanding that data with the credit bureau data and actually working it that way. I think the challenges are getting people to actually use open banking. I think I've seen one lender who've used it really well to predict sort of the arrears type piece, and then using nudge notifications, etc., to preempt that, to say, look, we're available, we're here to help. How can we help you? So it's for us, really, it's like looking at that type of information, that data, and how it could be more valuable. Obviously, the accuracy and how old that data is really key to actually making sure that you haven't hit it too late and it's not relevant. But I think that information and that analytics would be really helpful.
So definitely data and information is definitely coming through. And Mark, maybe just a couple of final words on where you sort of see us going over the next sort of year or so?
Yeah. Well, look, the future is here already. No, the future and the technology, it's here. It's just about actually people getting and starting using it. Don't expect miracles overnight. Make sure, we talked about it earlier, from a reporting point of view and the data points and all that, all of them. So the likes of, what we're seeing is that people are taking slow but steady steps. And that is exactly what we would encourage everybody. The likes of, we mentioned some of the power of the AI that's been, sort of customized for the collections models and what have you. So that's the future. It's just actually, it's building on that. And as people use it more, their confidence is going to grow more, right across the business. And the one thing that we can't actually lose sight of, we have to give a good experience to the end user. Because the minute we flip to thinking about this will be efficient for the business, it's going to be a fail. So that would be my parting comment. Yeah, just use what's there today, but it has to drive real customer good experiences for them, because that'll deliver the right result to the business every time. So I wouldn't worry about anything else. Just use what's there today and gradually build on it.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much, everyone. So great discussion. Really appreciate everyone sort of making time. I'm going to hand back to Colin, who's appeared.
Super. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the panel. Really appreciate that. Really interesting conversation there, and we had lots of questions coming in as well. Almost overloaded at one point. So anything we didn't cover, we'll obviously share with our panel post-event on email. We'll get their feedback and we'll put that in our review as well. But like I say, a big thank you, obviously, to Neil, Ajay, and Jodie and Mark for their input, and obviously WEbio for their support of the event. It's really great. We're going to carry on the conversations shortly, but you have to log in and log out to get onto that. That's going to discuss affordability and vulnerable customers. It starts at 10:45, so you've got around about 15 minutes to grab a coffee or a tea. But yeah, like to round up by saying thank you to everybody else who's tuned in and asked questions and interacted and took part in our polls. And we'll see you at a future event. Thanks a lot, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.